Part 1. Animals and the Stuff They Buy. Channel Up is the story of 7 animals. They just buy and sell stuff. And here's the stuff that they buy and sell in their little circular economy. Everyone buys and sells everything except for the green bull. He never ever touches a steak because that would just be weird and gross. To pay for all these things, the animals use bolts. You, the players, are in this story too. In fact, without players, there is no one to connect all of the animals and their payment channels. It's hard work, so players are paid bolts each time a payment is routed through one of their nodes. The fee is equal to the amount flowing, so when one bolt payment goes through a node, the owner of the node gets 1 bolt. When 2 go through, they get 2, and when 3 go through, they get 3. Players don't buy the same things the animals do. Players want pizza. 2 pizzas, in fact. Note, having the most bolts does not guarantee victory. The first one to buy 2 pizzas wins, regardless of how many bolts they have stacked. Each pizza costs 5 bolts, so players need 10 total to buy the 2 pizzas to win the game. The challenge is you only start with 7. Part 2. Where do the channels come from? The channels are connections between nodes. Players determine how nodes are set up by placing them on these open spaces. Player nodes can connect with animal nodes or with other player nodes. Players also determine each channel's capacity, that is, how many bolts it contains. A channel requires at least 1 bolt to be an active channel. Players can add up to 3 bolts per channel per turn. If you want more than 3 in a channel, that's not a problem. There is no maximum, but you will need to do it over multiple turns. The animals in our story are all nice. They agree to match the number of bolts in new channels. Note, this is only when starting the channel. If you open a channel with 1 bolt, there is a 1 bolt match. At a later turn, you can add more, called splicing in, but there's no more matching. When players open channels together, they negotiate. There are no requirements to match, only that the channel has at least 1 bolt. You cannot force another player to open a channel against their will, but either player can close it. The channels are split with a line. The bolts slide back and forth like an abacus. This is how to track who owns how much. It's basically a ledger. If a channel closes, for example, one person wants to deploy his node somewhere else on the board, each node gets the bolts on its respective side. Part 3. Market Dynamics. There are no central planners in Channel Up. No one knows what animals want or when they're going to want them. Every time you play, the story is different. The first step on everybody's turn is to reveal 1 new animal card and 1 new item card. The number of bolts on each item card is the price, and the color of the item card is also important. The yellow ones are temporary. There can only be 1 yellow item in play at a time. So if you draw a new yellow one, the old pair is discarded. The green ones, on the other hand, have no time limit. These stay active and in play until that demand is met. That means the buyer gets the item he wants. Some animals may even want more than 1 item at a time, and that's okay. Some items may be in demand by more than 1 animal, and that is also okay. So, real quick, a few tips about the marketplace. 1, remember that the bull never wants and will never pay for a steak dinner. 2, if you see this card, it's a joker. It's wild like Satoshi. Choose any animal you want. 3, if you see this card, then place an offline marker on that animal. He cannot buy or sell anything, nor can any payments be routed through him until his node is back online, which costs 2 bolts to fix. Part 4. Attackers and Protectors. Everything in the game starts peacefully enough. Players negotiate with each other. They are free to persuade, to influence, and to help one another. But the plot thickens as players become more tempted to attack. These aren't physical attacks, obviously, but everybody gets one attack marker, and to use it, you place it in a triangle space. This is called a griefing attack, and it impacts the 3 adjacent channels at once. No bolts can flow through channels under attack. These channels stay out of commission until someone pays 2 bolts to clear the attack. Note, you cannot attack a channel that is adjacent to the watchtower. This is where the plot thickens a little bit further. The watchtower is a protector, and while it cannot stop an active attack that is already in progress, it does protect its adjacent channels from being attacked. There is only one watchtower, but anyone in the game can move it. Part 5. Flows and Clogs. The channel up market is always changing. The items are constantly moving from animal to animal, and the bolts are constantly flowing the opposite direction. This is all good. However, over time, channels get out of sync. Often, there are bolts in channels that no longer need them, and vice versa. It is common to have channels where you want more bolts. This is perhaps your most critical role. You must actively balance your channels. So you can add bolts to channels that you need to in order to route payments. This is called splicing in. You can remove bolts from channels that no longer need them to help to route the payments. Maybe you need those bolts somewhere else, and that is called splicing out when you take them out. You may even need to close an entire node so you can open a new channel in a new area. You can get creative. For example, you could route payments between your own nodes to rebalance. So it's wonderful to help the animals buy stuff, but it's even more wonderful to receive bolts for routing payments. The better you are at balancing your channels, the more payments you can route through your nodes, the more fees you can collect, and the faster you can buy pizza. Part 6. You can't stop liquidity or fees. When the animals match the number of bolts in new channels, this immediately increases the number of bolts that are in play. Functionally, this is also critical because it introduces inbound liquidity. This in turn enables players to route items and to route more expensive items, which means higher fees. This compounds because every payment routed means someone earned bolts with the routing fee. Players then use their new bolts to splice into, that is, add to existing channels, or to open new channels. And thirdly, the number of animal item pairs revealed increases as play continues. And this gives players more options, more opportunities, and therefore even more payments routed. The result of all of these factors is that the number of bolts on the board, the total network liquidity, increases quickly. And soon, one of the players will decide to buy the first pizza of the game. This triggers Phase 2, transaction fees. Transaction fees refer to Layer 1 Bitcoin fees. These are different from the payment routing fees we've been talking about. The rule of thumb is transaction fees are due whenever the number of bolts in a channel changes. So let's talk about a couple of examples. So if you're opening a channel, you're going from 0 bolts to some number of bolts. That's a change. That's a fee. If you're closing a channel, it's going from some number of bolts to 0. That is a change, requires a fee. If you splice in, this is obvious, you are adding to the channel. That channel is still there. You have more bolts in it. That's a change. That's a fee. The same as if you take bolts out. Same idea. Channel is still there. You reduce the number of bolts in it. That's a change. It's a fee. If you route to yourself, there's no change. There's no fee because the number of bolts just stayed the same within the channel. They went from side to side, but they stay the same. This last example highlights that routing payments does not change the total amount in any given channel. Therefore, routing payments do not trigger Layer 1 fees. One last piece of good news to wrap all this up is that you only need to pay the Layer 1 fee once per turn, and it covers any number of changes you make. So you pay 1 bolt for your Layer 1 fee, and you can do as many opening, closing, splicing in, splicing outs as you need to for just 1 fee. That 1 bolt fee covers all the changes on a single turn. You literally are ready to go. Just set up the board. The recommendation is to set it up in a circle where you have 2-3-2 pattern, and it doesn't matter which animal goes where. Make sure every player gets a reference card. They get an attack piece. They get 3 nodes, and they get 7 bolts. And then you shuffle the 2 different decks, and then you put the remaining bolts in the nice little holder. You count out the number of pizzas. The number of pizzas in the game is equal to the number of players plus 1. It's almost like musical chairs, but you have 1 extra instead of 1 less. You take the 7 items, you distribute those across the animals. If you get into a discussion about where they should be placed, then you can just use the deck. You pick who is going to go first, and then you just proceed clockwise from there. Follow the checklist. The little reference card spells out exactly what you do on each turn. Help each other out for the first 2 times. So good luck, and I hope you get some pizza.